I'm Andy Shaw, President and CEO of the BGA, where for those of us who may not know, those of you who may not know, we shine a light on government and hold public officials accountable for a simple reason. Better government is our right. And so we investigate, litigate, educate, advocate, and communicate for the better government that, frankly, we're simply entitled to in exchange for our hard-earned tax dollars. It's simple as that. We are a 501c3, a nonprofit, and I tell you that because the work we do does require support. So those of you who appreciate events like this, you'll find BGA flyers out on the table in the lobby. I urge you to take one. Inside is an envelope. If you like what we do, contribute to our hard work. If you don't, attend our free events and enjoy them. I want to thank the Union League Club, our good partners, for hosting this event, our friends at CAN TV for broadcasting it live. They'll, of course, rebroadcast it at a later date, and it'll be available at some point on our website. And I want to thank our friends at Fox 32, and especially Dane Placco, for a video he provided that you'll be able to see. Did I hit everything? Okay. I take my cues from a great staff, and so because of that, the moderator today is going to be one of our senior policy analysts, Alden Lowry, who before that was a senior investigator at the BGA, and before that, publisher of the Chicago Reporter, the publication that covers urban issues so well and has for so many years. Alden will introduce the video and the panelists, and I want to just remind you that we will have audience questions after the panel presentation, so those of you who have questions or comments will be accommodated. So with no further ado, let me introduce Alden, who will pick it up, and he'll conduct the interview, and I'll be back and say goodbye to you at the end. And once again, thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Andy, for the intro, and thanks to all of you for joining us for what I think you can expect will be somewhat riveting, if that's a bit odd to use in the same sentence as municipal bankruptcy, but it's a very complex and an intricate issue, and there are a lot of different sides of it, and I think we're going to, with our panelists, we're going to touch on all sides of it before we get done. So thank you again for being here. Just quick note, the BGA, in addition to the great investigative work that we do, we also have a policy unit that advocates and educates around public policy issues. And Idea Forums is one of the ways in which the policy unit gets involved with the public to kind of hash out some of these more complex things that we deal with. Last year and even the year before that, we had Idea Forums on charter schools. We've had Idea Forums on term limits, an issue that the BGA didn't take a position on, but it was an issue that needed illumination for people to decide where they would be on that issue. We talked a lot about that a year ago. We also looked at the Lucas Museum, which is another contentious issue here that the BGA did not take a position on. And municipal bankruptcy is another issue, very important issue, public policy issue that's getting a lot of debate right now. The BGA, as Andy mentioned, does not take a position on it, but it is one that needs vetting and great discourse, and we hope to provide that for you tonight. On the way in this morning to the office, I heard a commercial on the radio, and in the commercial was a clergyman who was talking about a bankruptcy attorney, and he said, and I quote, "If you're struggling with debt, then bankruptcy can be your salvation." And I thought that was a very interesting message to hear on this morning in advance of this event. He was talking about personal individual bankruptcy, Chapter 7, Chapter 13. But there is a big difference between those bankruptcies and corporate bankruptcy under Chapter 11 with Chapter 9, the part of the Federal Bankruptcy Code that deals with local governments, as we call them, municipalities, and how they are able to file for bankruptcy. However, if you've listened to a lot of the conversation around this issue lately, you might think that there are a number of people who believe that bankruptcy may be the salvation for struggling municipalities who are dealing with a burdensome pension debt and other struggling cash flow problems and other things like that. So we will, like I said, take a good look at those issues today to deal with that. To give us kind of a general overview, our friends at Fox 32 recently did a report on municipal bankruptcy, and they've agreed to share it with us so we can share it with you today. And so we're going to roll that video now, and after that, we'll introduce our panelists and we'll get things going.
If you're short on money and you can't pay your bills, you can go to court and declare bankruptcy. But that legal tool is not available to cities and school districts here in Illinois.
And now some politicians, including Governor Bruce Rauner, are looking to change that. As Dane Placco investigates, they are pushing for a new law that would give government bodies the ability to declare bankruptcy in the face of crushing pension debt.
The numbers are staggering. Let's start with the state. Illinois has $111 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. The city of Chicago, $20 billion, and another $9.5 billion for Chicago public schools. Billions more are owed by suburban villages and school districts, which is why some believe part of the solution to Illinois' pension crisis is bankruptcy.
I think that we already have municipalities so hard up against the wall that they're going to go to Springfield and say, you have to give this to us.
A bill that would give Illinois governments the right to go bankrupt is being debated in the House and may be gaining traction after the recent Supreme Court decision blowing up the state's pension reform law. Governor Bruce Rauner referenced it in a recent speech to the City Council.
I want you to have the tools you need to save Chicago.
Chapter 9 is a little-used part of the U.S. Bankruptcy Code that provides a financially distressed municipality protection from creditors while it negotiates a plan to adjust its debts. Supporters say it would allow those cities and school boards to restructure pension agreements and obligations, something they currently cannot do.
What this basically is saying, we have too much debt, we have too many liabilities, we need to keep the money, say, in our classrooms or in our core public services, and the way to restructure is through the bankruptcy process.
Detroit went bankrupt, but it's one of only a handful of cities across the nation to pull it off. That's because you have to be able to prove problems are much bigger than just pensions.
It isn't just, look, I've got debts that I can't pay over the next 20 years. There has to be a cash flow crisis. There has to be an immediate problem that the court would be willing to address.
Public employee unions are fighting the Illinois bill. Anders Lindahl of AFSCME calling it reckless and dangerous.
There are options for the city of Chicago and for municipalities around the state to raise the revenue they need to pay their debts, and they should do so responsibly.
Lindahl points out the credit rating agency Fitch recently criticized the idea of bankruptcy, saying there are other more productive options. But proponents believe that once taxpayers understand just how much their property tax bills will have to go up to cover pension obligations, some say 50%, going broke won't look like such a bad idea after all, Jeff.
So, Dane, what is the status of that bankruptcy bill in Springfield right now?
I talked to State Representative Republican Ron Sandak earlier today, who sponsored the bill. He says it's sort of in legislative purgatory, held up in the Rules Committee by Speaker Madigan. However, he says he's making tweaks to the bill that he thinks can make it more palatable and hopes to get it out of committee up for a full vote before the end of session.
All right, thanks so much for that. So that gives you a good, very general kind of overview of the issue, and we're going to spend a little more time kind of talking about that and then moving on more specifically to what's happening here locally. Let me introduce the four esteemed panelists who will help us through the conversation, and their names are on the table here so they know exactly where to go once they get up here. So our first panelist is James Spiato, who is a bankruptcy attorney and is also publisher of MuniNetGuide.com, a very resourceful website that tells you just about everything you need to know about municipal governments across the country. We also have Carol Neville, who's a lawyer with Denton's Municipal Reform and Restructuring Group, and she's also counsel for the Detroit Retiree Committee, and she has a very insider kind of perspective on the Detroit bankruptcy. We'll talk with her a little bit more in depth about that. We also have the Honorable Larry Morrissey, who's mayor of Rockford, Illinois, and has publicly stated that he is a supporter of the idea, or at least the ability of municipalities to declare bankruptcy. And Mayor Morrissey, I just want to say, has often given a disclaimer that that does not mean that he, in any way, is saying that Rockford is in need of that kind of protection, just that municipalities across the state should have the ability to do or to have it if they need it. And finally, our fourth panelist is Sakab Badi, who is director of the Refund America Project. So we will have those four panelists. Please come on down and join us. Just a very quick update on the legislation that Dane Placco mentioned in his report. the bill was still alive before the session ended. The session has ended. That bill did not go anywhere, and we may actually ask one of the panelists to give us a better update on where that bill is right now. It is effectively dead at the moment, but the fight for that bill is still alive, and the sponsor of the bill, Representative Ron Sandak, is in the midst of trying to make it more palatable. And we'll ask Mayor Morrissey in particular, who's been in contact with the representative about that at some point during our conversation. So let's get right into it. We're going to ask each of the individuals to kind of give us an opening statement, 2 to 3 minutes. And in the opening statement, we're really kind of looking for you to kind of provide us some insight in terms of how you have fit into the kind of debate around municipal bankruptcy and some general impressions, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty during the course of our conversation. And we will start with you, Mr. Spiatto.
Good. Well, thank you. And it's my pleasure to talk to you. Back in the 1980s, I got involved with regard to the amendments to Chapter 9, which was going through the House and the Senate, and providing advice and drafts of proposed legislation. Since then, I've been working with the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee with regard to amendments thereafter. And I've been involved in a number of Chapter 9 bankruptcies throughout the years, as well as helping cities and municipalities deal with this and work it out without the use of Chapter 9. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. There are alternatives. Chapter 9 was there and came about during the Depression, when we had over 1,000 municipalities in some form of default with annihilating litigation to give them a fresh start. It was never to be the first alternative. It was always to be the absolutely last alternative when all other failed. The important thing is we haven't had a long history of major cities using Chapter 9. There's only been 5 municipalities that have had over 100,000 in population in the last 60 years that have used it. Orange County in 1994, Vallejo in 2008, which was sort of close to 100,000 population, Jefferson County in 2011, Stockton and San Bernardino in 2012, and then you had Detroit file in 2013. Since Detroit filed in 2013, no city, town, village, or county has filed for Chapter 9. There have been examples of working it out. New York City in 1975 had problems. They formed a Municipal Assistance Corp. They addressed their financial needs. They addressed the things you had to do to reinvest in the municipality, worked it out over time, solved the problem. Cleveland in '78, with help from the state, did the same thing. Philadelphia in 1991. Recently, Pittsburgh in the late 1990s through the early 2000s turned around a situation and basically reinvested in the municipality, made sure the infrastructure and essential services were acceptable, attracted new business, created new jobs. Between 2004 to 2013, they increased jobs by 30,000 in the city. So it is those types of examples that show that if you address the problem early enough, and obviously Detroit and some others are examples that you don't, the long history is to find solutions so that your citizens get the services they need. You create new jobs, new economic activity that provides more than enough funds to cover services, infrastructure, and paying what you should be paying to your workers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Spiatto. Mr. Body, you're next.
Great. So I am the director of the Refund America project at the Roosevelt Institute. The Roosevelt Institute is an economic policy think tank. Refund America project in particular looks at the role of financial deals in contributing to budget distress in municipalities, cities, and states. And we work closely with community organizations, unions, and policy groups to try to really expose what we call predatory lending in the municipal markets and to present alternatives to austerity. And so in that capacity, I worked very closely in Detroit with the community coalition that was organizing around the bankruptcy to really educate the public about the role that interest rate swaps are playing in which a particular type of financial deal in contributing to the bankruptcy and exacerbating the situation. It was ultimately a successful campaign in which we were able to recover about $265 million, force the banks to take a haircut of $265 million on their swap deals, basically take 25 cents on the dollar instead of 100 cents. And so the thing that's sort of interesting about that is that we sort of were able to really push this narrative that really goes against the grain of against the grain of what the bankruptcy was trying to accomplish in many ways, right? Because as we sort of saw in the Fox special or in the Fox News over here, the debate around the bankruptcy was all about should we be cutting pensions or should we be cutting services? We really tried to pit pensions and services against each other. And what we need is to really start talking about a different kind of debate that says we should be talking about who should have to pay to provide us the services that we all need, right? Because too often the debate ends up being, should we be closing schools, should we be cutting off people's water, or should we be slashing pensions? Well, in reality, the fact is all three of those things force working class communities to pay to address the budget crisis, and they let sort of millionaires, big corporations off the hook. And what we need is to figure out how we can actually start putting forth progressive revenue solutions like a millionaire's tax or a financial transactions tax, a progressive corporate income tax. And we also need to look at things like interest rate swaps, which we also have here in the city of Chicago, where currently the mayor is getting ready to pay 100 cents on the dollar on Chicago's interest rate swap deals. I mean, these are types of things. There are many ways in which the financial sector, corporations sort of game the system through tax subsidies, financial deals, so forth. And they're never asked to sort of pay the price. They're never asked to sacrifice to make ends meet. The burden always falls on the people who can least afford it because they have the least political juice. And so what we need to do is flip the debate on its head. Right now, what I'm looking at is sort of researching ways that other cities, including Chicago, are at this point trying to adapt the Detroit model, which really is sort of using the bankruptcy threat to try to push an austerity agenda, to say that unless we do this, we have no choice, we have all this debt, and we have to do this. But really what we need to be is flip that on its head. Instead of sort of using the Detroit model to push austerity, what we need to do is use Detroit as a cautionary tale for why we need progressive revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Boddy.
Wow.
Carol Neville, you're next.
So I'm Carol Neville. I'm from Denton's. It's a big law firm. We represented the only official committee in the Detroit bankruptcy. So it was the official committee of retirees. And in the audience is Kim Nickel, who was the auditor for the retiree committee, our advisor. So we have a lot of expertise on that. My firm just recently joined forces with McKenna Long Aldrich, and the reason I'm mentioning that is that that firm did the Harrisburg restructuring. So our municipal group has the experience of restructuring in a bankruptcy and restructuring without the bankruptcy. I think all of us agree that allowing a municipality to just slide into bankruptcy is not what anybody wants. I don't have a soapbox about how I see the role of a bankruptcy here, but I do think that without a club of a sort, you have a hard time bringing people to the table. And I think the goal of a restructuring now, of a municipal restructuring, is to, first of all, have an end game. You have to know what the end of a bankruptcy would look like, and you have to negotiate with all the constituents. So you have to organize them. It's the same thing that we have actually in a Chapter 11. If you file for Chapter 11, a corporation files for Chapter 11 without a game plan, it's a free fall. And Detroit, to some extent, was a free fall bankruptcy because there wasn't a clear plan before they entered into Chapter 11. It should never be the paradigm of what municipalities should do. It was a total feel your way through a huge mess. I just want to tell you what the result of Detroit was. Very little bond debt got restructured. They entered with $6 billion of secured debt. Some of that got stretched out a bit or had an interest rate modestly adjusted or a covenant removed, but the $6 billion stayed intact. The only thing that got really restructured was $1 billion of certificates of participation, which are not the same kind of municipal debt that bonds are. So there's a lot of misconceptions about what actually happened in Detroit. I just want to say one thing about Chapter 9. It is a debt restructuring mechanism. It doesn't deal with revenue and an operational restructuring. So you're only dealing with half the picture. And operational restructuring should not be a shortcut for raising property taxes. There are other ways to raise revenue. There are other ways to address the shortfall, which I hope we get to talk about, because I'm really all about solutions, not just about filing.
Thank you, Ms. Neville. Mayor Morrison.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. And as a recovering attorney, I could just tell you, well, I'm humbled by the experts that I'm here with on the panel. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm not coming at this conversation from the standpoint of my former life as a practicing attorney. I'm coming at it as a practitioner who's been in public office now for 10 years. I'll tell you, one of the interesting perspectives I think I bring to the table. Back in 2005, when I was 35, I was typically the youngest mayor in the room. So I think that gave me a perspective, because I had to think about what the decisions would have on my life that I'd still have to live for quite a few years. 10 years later, I'm typically still the youngest mayor in the room, but now I have 4 children and a wife, and the challenges and the decisions that I have to make mean even more to me today than they did back in 2005. So my frustration is, why are we still having this conversation? It's 2015. Didn't the Great Recession end? What happened in 2009 that cities were dealing with, like ours, when we did our first series of cuts? We began and we struggled to try to reset. When we saw GM and Chrysler go through a resetting, when we saw other states, frankly, go through resetting on things like home mortgage foreclosures, why is it that in 2015 in the state of Illinois we're still having this conversation? I would argue to you that the very mechanics of municipal operations are hindered by our inability to reset. In Illinois, with a long history of industrial labor language and definitions that are embedded into our operating agreements, our collective bargaining agreements, that entire system was designed for gradual change. Our arbitration system that we're forced to go through for cities in Illinois, if you have a full-time police department, fire department, it doesn't allow, by its very nature and the laws that govern it, for the type of dramatic consequences and challenges that we were dealing with when the market collapsed in the fall of 2008. So our inability to reset means in 2015 we're still having these conversations about the future of Illinois and the future of Illinois cities. And that, to me, is the first devastating thing we have to recognize. I think we also have to recognize is that there is hope, there is solutions, and I'm very proud to be mayor of a city like other mayors throughout the state who will wake up no matter what hand is dealt to us, and we will do our very best to provide services to our citizens. But the dramatic challenge we deal with today, and it's heading on the horizon in January of 2016, that for every other city outside of Chicago, unless something changes, the 2011 pension diversion law will force those cities that have underfunded their payments and aren't paying on their actuarial required contribution amounts, they will get hit with a huge, huge burden that they may not be able to solve with their current revenues. And at a time when all non-home rule communities are already governed by property tax caps, and there's threats of capping our ability to raise revenue even for home rule communities, what we're dealing with is the false choice. We should not have to make this choice. And I agree with Mr. Boddy when he said we should not, I think we need to change the language of what we're talking about. But the choice right now as it exists will be the following. When push comes to shove, are we going to pay a cop, a retiree, or a bondholder? And I can tell you if the law, when the law comes into place, we won't be able to not pay our pension contributions, so the retirees are covered. Then the question is, do we pay the cop on the street? Or are we going to stiff a bondholder and be in default? What bankruptcy gives us is the ability to manage those conflicts through an orderly process. I don't want to be there, and by the way, the disclaimer, I want to remind everyone, we're not going to be in that position in Rockford, God willing. We make our payments. We're one of the best funded top 5 of the top 20 largest cities in the state. But when that choice has to be made without bankruptcy to resolve the issue, we will be looking at chaotic conversations in a state court as opposed to a more orderly conversation in a federal bankruptcy court. Or even better, with the risk of bankruptcy out there, we'll come to the table beforehand and work it out without having to file a Chapter 9. So I'm pleased to be here and look forward to our conversation tonight, and that's the general perspective I'll be bringing.
Thank you so much, Mayor Morrissey, and to all of the panelists for your opening comments. I just want to remind our audience members and people who are watching that some of our panelists have produced policy position papers. I give some background about the work that they do and also their position on bankruptcy or municipal bankruptcy, and you can find those things online at bettergov.org. And so without further ado, let's jump right in. So Dane Placko graced us with the report he did recently, kind of giving an overview. I think he did a pretty good job of giving some very baseline things. Are there any other things that you'd mention that you think our audience should know about Chapter 9 that distinguishes it from maybe corporate or personal bankruptcy that they may be more familiar with, or any other kind of nuts and bolts things that you think people need to know about Chapter 9?
I'm going to jump in and just correct one thing that I think is it's false. It sounds cool and sexy, but it's just not true. Cities aren't going broke. Cities have revenue. Cities have lots of revenue at record levels in many cases. However, what's the challenges are those revenues aren't keeping up with our costs. So that we have quite a bit of revenue. Our challenges on the cost side of the equation, it's not as though we don't have an income. Look, when a homeowner loses a job and they don't have revenue, that's a very different position. We have revenue. It's a matter of managing our costs and trying to partake in a sustainable system.
I would actually just jump in on that. I think that that's a question of debate whether or not we have enough revenue, because I think that I would actually argue the problem is not on the cost side, it's on the revenue side. Certainly in Detroit, a big part of the actual cash flow shortfall that they faced was that the revenue was drastically decreased immediately in the immediate sort of immediately preceding the bankruptcy. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's important that distinguishes municipal bankruptcy from a corporate bankruptcy, is that the municipal bankruptcy is actually not about your total debt load. It's about like what municipal insolvency, what it actually consists of. What it means is that you're unable to pay your bills, your debts as they come due. So it's not about the fact that you have all this outstanding debt. It's about whether or not you can actually meet your cash flow needs in a particular year. And that's why, like in the case of Detroit, for instance, the revenue was a huge issue. It really was that you had the state drastically cut the revenue options drastically cut revenue to the city, and that's what really contributed to it. And I think that's one of the things that if we look at even a lot of the pension underfunding situation that we have, it's what you have is that cities don't have enough revenue, and so they've sort of made the decision to kick the can down the road by not properly funding the pension, and instead borrowing from pensioners instead of raising taxes.
Right. I think actually you're both right in this way. One, all that Chapter 9 does is reduce debt to the point where it is sustainable and affordable, i.e. the revenues are sufficient so that the municipality can continue to provide services at an acceptable level and reinvest in the municipality, i.e. the infrastructure necessary and the stimulation of the economy, so that you can grow the desire of people to stay there, which is key, grow the desire of people who aren't there to move there, and grow the desire of people who have businesses there to expand, and those who don't to move in there. And you get your revenue by that recovery or reinvestment process. Municipalities, taxes can't grow to the sky as trees can't grow to the sky. So you have to sort of adjust it. Yes, do taxes go up? They do go up. But if you, and one of our founding fathers' principles were, if you raise taxes beyond the elastic limit, people leave. And if your businesses and citizens leave, which was the problem in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1991, which was the problem of Detroit for decades, you don't have a good situation, you have a wrong situation.
I was just going to jump on that one point. I'll give you evidence that that is exactly the situation, and the best evidence I can point to about what happens when the trees have already hit the ceiling in Rockford. We have one of the highest property tax rates, not just in the state, but the entire nation, at 14% of our combined rate against our equalized assessed values. That's a huge, huge number. I believe it's probably close to twice the city of Chicago's base rate. So what we're dealing with is citizens who can leave have been leaving. Not at the rate that Detroit suffered, but we just got our population report just came out. We've lost 2.5% of our population. We led the state in population loss. What category of employee, because they can leave and they want their taxes to be lower, have left? We don't have a residency requirement. We lost it through collective bargaining. Approximately 70% of our police and firefighters have left Rockford to the surrounding suburban areas where, guess what? They utilize volunteer firefighters. It's illegal in Rockford to have volunteer firefighters. So what I've said in our collective bargaining discussions, if it's good enough for your family in your homes, why isn't it good enough for the city? What happens is they want lower costs, they want higher value, they want their mortgage payment to go into the home value, and so what typically Rockford has, we have a higher property tax rate, our values of all our homes are dramatically lower, and just since 2009, since the start of the Great Recession, we've lost 30% of our equalized assessed value as a community. At the same time, our pension contributions have increased 40%. So there's an unsustainable mix that's happening. Like I said, we're not going to be the first to file. We don't want to ever have to file. But bankruptcy, if it's there, is a tool to bring collective bargaining units to the table with a modicum of common sense that's going to help us resolve these issues so that we can be sustainable into the future.
It's not an accident that the collective bargaining agreement for the teachers has expired and is not being renegotiated right now. But I want to point out something that I was just looking at today. I was noodling around the taxes of Illinois and how the taxes are used. Not property taxes, but sales taxes and cigarette taxes. Connecticut and Illinois are the only two states that direct revenue from cigarette sales to the reduction of taxes and not to other development. So you could have $400 million, which is about what cigarette taxes generate, and use it to fund pensions. You could direct funds from gasoline tax, from alcohol, from other taxes to fund pensions. You could direct revenue from project financing to fund pensions. You don't have to keep looking at property taxes, raising property taxes to fund pensions.
I mean, just related to that, I mean, I would sort of point out that, I mean, in reality, the fact is that Illinois is one of the most regressive tax systems in the country. We still have a constitutional flat tax, right? We really need, like, if we're talking about, because I absolutely agree with you, the solution is not sort of, you keep raising property tax, because that's actually, I mean, it's actually, on the whole, a relatively regressive tax, right? You actually need to figure out how you can raise progressive income tax, and that's what we really need in this state. And what you have, I mean, right now, like, it's just not a sustainable model, because you basically have the ability to, you can't tax the top without also taxing the bottom, and that's really a system that works for those at the top who don't want to have to pay more, but it doesn't work for those at the bottom who actually need the services that.
Going to jump in just for a second here, because part of the question that the court will consider when there is when it's considering a Chapter 9 is this question of revenue and whether the municipality is insolvent. How does the court kind of take a peek at that? Does it, will it go as far as to say, hey, you need to institute a progressive income tax, or you need to talk about some of these other, does it go that far, or?
Well, I'll let an expert handle it in a second, but I'll tell you, at least I know this much. It is laughable to suggest that Springfield is going to take new revenue, or rather old revenue that they're using to pay for something else, and give it to us poor cities. Not going to happen. They're talking about taking half right now of our existing local government distributive fund. So cigarette tax or anything else, if there's new revenue to be had, they're going to use it to pay their bills first. Remember, we're talking about Chapter 9 for municipalities. The state's issues, they are the sovereign, right? If they could fix their problems if they wanted to, if they had the political will to do so. we're in a very different position. As a matter of fact, what seems to be the soup du jour is to flush their bad debt onto us and then have us wash it out. So that doesn't work for us, right? And so local government, on the revenue side, we're already we're in trouble. So all of the language is about capping our ability to raise taxes, suggesting, by the way, the city of Rockford hasn't raised taxes in the last 2 years. Our rate continues to go up. Why? Because values go down. Basic algebra, right? Try to explain that to a taxpayer. You know, they think I'm immune from it. I still have my first home, my starter home that I couldn't sell. Why? Because it was underwater, right? I went through HARP just like a lot of other folks. So what we're dealing with, and I would just totally disagree that this is not a revenue problem, at least not for us. This is an organizational problem to take existing revenues and spend them better. And what a bankruptcy judge can do is reset nonsense that's got built into our contracts. For us, it means things like minimum manning. It means that it's right now illegal for us to use volunteer firefighters. We have a total inability to decide whether we're going to put the dollar into a firefighter versus a police officer. A bankruptcy judge can do what Springfield is unwilling to do. Why? Because of the politics. The math is not hard on this. Unfortunately, the politics is.
Mayor Morris, you mentioned politics, and Mr. Spino, before we started the event, you talked about this entire process should bring people together. But it seems clear from some of the conversations that have happened around the issue that there are kind of divisions along who supports this and who's against it. Generally speaking, who generally speaking is in favor of municipal bankruptcy, and who do we generally see on the other side of that?
Well, you know, first of all, there should be no we-they in this process. There should only be a we, because we are all going to win or we all are going to lose, and that's the net reality. With regard to in favor of bankruptcy, really all Chapter 9 has been used up till now is the or else. We all know as parents, if you want to make sure the garbage goes out, you can say please take it out, or you can say please take it out or else. The or else gives a little more oomph to making sure that it gets done. And what Chapter 9 is merely debt adjustment. The bankruptcy judge has no power over the politics, revenue, or affairs of the municipality. So it can't tell the municipality what to do on the taxing side. But what can happen is that the judge has to approve whatever debt adjustment plan there is to show that it is in the best interest of creditors and is feasible. And best interest is an interesting test. What it really is intended to mean is that the plan should really be not only debt adjustment, but a recovery plan. What are you going to do to reinvest in infrastructure and in services that will do exactly what we said before, attract all those people, create new jobs, increase the revenues? That's what every community does. Why did Detroit have a problem? Why did Bridgeport, Connecticut have a problem? Why did Stockton have a problem? Why did San Bernardino have a problem? Why did Vallejo have a problem? Because they did invest, stimulate, and grow. And every urban planner will tell you what you need to do, and this is why it's us, it's not they. We need to be more dense. You know, one of the things I always say, I'm not overweight, I'm just too short for my weight. and it's the same thing here. We need to make sure we create more jobs and more taxpayers. If the city of Chicago, like any other city, if it had the 3.5 million population that it had in 1950, there'd be more taxpayers, more jobs, and more there to pay. We have the same infrastructure, if not better infrastructure. We need to improve it. So there are a number of different things that we can do, and it's all together. Yes, you can take different sides. You know, it isn't, and how are the workers, how are the taxpayers, how are the creditors all benefited? They're benefited by growing the pie, by growing the future, by reinvestment. If you don't do it, and you say, fine, we're going to put all the money here and not take care of some of the other people and reinvest in the municipality, what you will have is less, because you will have businesses and individuals leaving, which happened in Detroit, Bridgeport, Connecticut, and every other major city that has ever gone into Chapter 9. And what you need to do is turn that around, get it going the right way, and that's the solution.
But what that means is, starting right now, to get people to really talk to each other, you have to identify who are the constituents, who represents them and get them together. I mean, we did not actually get to do that in the Detroit bankruptcy. We all sat in separate rooms and never talked to each other, which is why that bankruptcy went on for 14 months and was so acrimonious. When you have a Chapter 11, creditors get together and negotiate. Fight, yes, but they negotiate. And that should be happening now, for people to start to talk about what the priorities are and how they can be resolved. I bet that a collective bargaining agreement would not be radically reorganized in a Chapter 9. The judges really pay very little attention to the nuts and bolts of how a city actually works. And Judge Rhodes was probably more hands-on than we expected him to be, but he really had no role in the labor negotiations or the pension restructuring discussions. He played no role.
I was shocked, frankly, at some of the things that came out of the Detroit bankruptcy, and I don't want to get into that. But I just think it's unfair to treat police officers and firefighters substantially different, somewhat different, yes, but not substantially different than everybody else in terms of what they get paid on their pension if you're going through an insolvency. By the way, we're making our payments. We're on our arc. No problems in Rockford when it comes to that. We're paying a lot. So I just think I would love to have and believe I would love to have a setting in which we can come together. Right now, the system we have makes it hard to bring people together because there is no hammer at the end. There's no perceived sense of risk at the end.
I mean, so this is the thing that's, I think, important about this, right? I mean, to me, there is a difference between someone who's actually dedicated all their lives working for the city, and actually is basically, I mean, pensions are deferred wages. They've actually already earned it, right? It's money that you've already earned, you're actually supposed to get it back. When there's unfunded liability, it's because instead of actually paying towards your paycheck, because it's, again, part of your compensation, the city decided that they diverted the money somewhere else. So we're saying, so there actually is something different about it, and that's why the Illinois Constitution, for instance, actually protects pensioners, as did the Michigan Constitution. And one of the things that's problematic is one of the big precedents coming out of the Detroit bankruptcy is that you can use Chapter 9 to basically get around your Constitution, which frankly, to me, calls into question the constitutionality of HB 298, which would be the municipal bankruptcy bill in Illinois. If the whole purpose is to subvert the Constitution, I mean, there's that question.
That was raised in the Detroit bankruptcy.
Right. Although Illinois has a stronger language,
just to clarify this issue about the promise that's being made, I make a promise each and every day I go to work to protect the citizens of the city of Rockford, to provide police and fire service, to provide public works so that someone is there to plow a street. So that we have the ability to manage our Head Start program for all of our children that are in poverty, that are trying to get out of poverty. So the promise that we make is to all of our taxpayers, not just the ones that are paid for, or that are employees that we pay their salaries for. The other piece of it is it's a very different conversation about keeping a promise for a year that they've already earned. Right now we have a two-tier system in Illinois based on that 2011 law that passed. So all the new hires have a different deal than everyone else. For our current folks that were hired prior to that year, they're on the old plan. That old plan is the one that we're struggling with and trying to make it through so that we can receive the benefits of that other less costly plan. The Supreme Court decision absolutely makes it very difficult to think about changing any terms.
Outside of a bankruptcy.
Outside of a bankruptcy, right. So my hope is, and the parties can always come to the table and reach a voluntary agreement, but what we're talking about is trying to align with our actual taxpayers' expectations. I don't blame a legislator who voted for a plan when they thought the tech boom in the late 90s would never end, right? A lot of the changes that occurred to the public safety pension system occurred in years when we thought the good old days, remember the days when we thought we would retire the national debt, right? Good old days, Clinton, we were all, was in office. We had money in Hope 6, cities were, Chicago was tearing down Cabrini Green. That world changed dramatically. And when it did, we now have to face the music because we set up a system that doesn't allow a change. I don't think that is a fair deal for any taxpayers. And when we have a tool that allows us to reset so that everyone is treated fairly, I think we need to take advantage of it.
You know, the way of bringing everybody together. Other states have vehicles in which, prior to Chapter 9, people get together with technical assistance, sometimes from the state or some commission or authority, that provides some advice as to what long-term sustainability and affordability is. They develop a recovery plan. And the recovery plan is where you start. It's what they're going to do to reinvest in the municipality, to give hope to everyone that this, if we do this, we will raise our revenues and there will be more for everyone. Pensions and the future of retirees, workers, taxpayers, and creditors is not today where the municipality is, but where it's going to be 5, 10, 15, and 20 years from now. If you started with a recovery plan, and having done restructurings for both states and local governments elsewhere, I can tell you that normally you start with the recovery plan. That's how you get buy-in. That's how people say, we want to do it. And rather than argue about what are they going to get and what I'm going to get, this is what we have, how can we share it, and how can we make it happen? And you can be able to pay, if you increase the probability of having more revenues in the future, everyone buys into the hope, makes the contribution, realizing in the future they'll get more.
The irony, Jim, is that the Michigan statute actually contemplates that kind of pre-planning before you go into bankruptcy. And what happened was that it was all circumvented, possibly because of what you were talking about, the fact that the state pulled back its financing, but also because the politics of Michigan was that they wanted that filing. They wanted that filing because they wanted to reduce not only pension debt, but the health care coverage. So they actually circumvented the whole process, which was set up to look at a sustainable financial recovery.
We need to move along to more local aspects of this. But I did want to ask one question, particularly the folks who were very closely associated with the Detroit bankruptcy. What would you say are the key lesson to be learned from that experience for Chicago and other municipalities that may be thinking along the lines of going that route?
There isn't a single key lesson, but one of the things that was the most hopeful thing to me about the Detroit bankruptcy, and there wasn't a whole lot because it was pretty miserable, was that the financial creditors stepped up to the plate to participate in the redevelopment of Detroit. You know, it's something, Jim, you probably know this, you represented bondholders. I've represented bondholders in Chapter 11. They are willing to put new money in even where they lost money. And because their memories are short, and also because they see an upside that we don't necessarily see. So the bondholders stepped up to the plate, and actually to settle some of the bigger restructuring issues in Detroit have moved into redevelopment of vacant land, tearing down Joe Louis Stadium and redeveloping the waterfront, a whole lot of projects, project financing. And that was one very positive lesson of Detroit. And the main lesson, I think, is that you should never file for a Chapter 9 or a Chapter 11 without knowing what your end game is and without having some pre-negotiations with your constituents.
There are three, I think, key lessons from Detroit, very quickly. One, it's never too early to address the problem and address it quickly. Second, develop a recovery plan first. How are you going to turn it around? And make sure you get buy-in with the people. And third, make sure that you bring people together, not divide them. Because in the end, in all successful Chapter 9s, people have to come together because they have to live together in the future.
Yeah, Illinois is doing none of that. Just to make sure we're clear on that. We're not quick, we have no plan, and we're definitely not working together. So,
quick question. This has been thrown around a million times since 2013. But is Chicago the next Detroit? Just very quickly, can we squash that or?
Well, no, because there's no Chapter 9 law, right? So you can't file now. So we're on our own, man. I'm just telling you, this is the reality. I don't expect the state to pass this. when they can't solve their own issues, why are they going to help us? Now, there's an argument to be made that this might be crafted into a master solution, and I am praying literally for our leaders in Springfield. I don't envy any of their jobs. They've inherited a lot of what we're dealing with. We've got a lot of borrowed mechanisms from the 20th century that don't work anymore. Like I said, I'm young enough, I got to live to figure out what the 21st century is going to look like and make that happen. And I would just say to you, my denial and delay is getting us nowhere. And we have to recognize we're not resource poor, we're simply starving ourselves. This isn't California where we have no water, right? We've got a huge big lake in Lake Michigan. Rockford's on its own aquifer. We've got incredible agricultural land. We are a resource rich, we should never feel sorry for ourselves state. I never ever want to go to work feeling sorry for myself as the mayor of the city of Rockford. I challenge anybody to find a better city than our city. That's how much I believe in our future. That being said, we have to come to the table. By the way, that quick, with a plan and working together is a great formula. The challenge is we simply don't have a mechanism right now. Detroit, by the way, didn't have a mechanism either. They went for years with a financial receiver trying to do the same thing the municipal leadership couldn't do, and guess what? They finally gave them permission to file. They didn't have Chapter 9 as a right in Detroit. They probably would have done a lot earlier. So what we're dealing with is the politics doesn't want to face the music. That's why GM and Chrysler, they've got people investing them hand over foot despite their challenges because they washed out the old and they're able to move forward. That's what we need, some mechanism like that in Illinois that just doesn't exist today.
Again, just trying to move us along. House Bill 298, we've heard directly from Representative Sandak. He says unequivocally that the bill is not dead, that the session has not formally adjourned,
right.
And he's hoping that it will be heard in committee soon. Moving ahead, that bill in its initial form was very quick. It was one paragraph, essentially just stating that municipalities in Illinois would have the ability to file for bankruptcy as it's dictated in the Federal Bankruptcy Code under Chapter 9. What should this law include? Should it be something that simple, or should we have a much more kind of complex system or process, if you will? And there have been other bills that have been floated that try to come up with kind of a go-between. But what should that language look like?
James and I talked a little bit about this. There's been an amendment that's been filed by Representative Sandak that includes a couple changes that I think are important to note. Number one, it allows for a lien as a right for bondholders. Number two, it requires sort of a gatekeeper process that cities would have to go through before having the ability to file. Wouldn't mandate that they accept a solution, but having a resource pool that cities can go through is hopefully a way to avoid having most bankruptcy filings actually have to take place.
Right. One thing to keep in mind, most states don't authorize their municipalities to file Chapter 9. 12 states generally authorize their municipalities so they can wake up in the morning and say, I want to go into Chapter 9. Another 12 states have basically a condition. You have to get approval from the governor, from a legislative body or commission or authority or the treasurer. And the rest of them either limit it to just a type of municipality, and 21 don't authorize any of their municipalities. 2 of the states prohibit them from going in, which is sort of a negative authorization. What does that mean? That means that what we learn from those states is those that have just general authorization without any condition to it, no second look, so to speak, versus those with a second look. The difference is it's 6 times more likely if you can just do it without conditions, you find the municipality going in, that if you have a second look and people looking at it and saying, what about this, what about that, you find a solution outside of Chapter 9. Since 1980, it's 200 to 32. That's those who have authorized generally versus those who have a condition to it. So it is makes a real difference.
But California has a process before you can go in, and Detroit has, I looked at PA 436 today because I couldn't remember all of the steps. It has 5 very elaborate steps, and they just filed. And the same thing happened with Vallejo and San Bernardino, that the municipalities sidestepped the process. So it's very hard to construct a law that is actually going to give you a real second look, but very important. And another issue that is very important is whether and how much state control over the bankruptcy there is. I mean, one of the problems with Detroit's bankruptcy is that the state was never at the table, and the state was pulling the strings.
Well,
so you couldn't really negotiate with the people who actually were calling the shots.
Well, quite candidly, the reason why we only have had 63 cities, towns, villages, and counties file since 1954 in the last 60 years, and a third of those never got to a debt adjustment. They found another solution, and all but about 6 of them were cities very small. It was because the other mechanisms work. The second look, the technical assistance, the bringing people together. That's what helped New York City with MAC. That's what helped Cleveland in 78. PICA, the Pennsylvania Intergovernment Cooperation Act for Philadelphia. Pittsburgh just did it through Act 47. And I think, you know, the issue of Chicago and others, Chicago is the 6th largest metropolitan area by GDP economy in the world. To think that if we, you know, what Detroit, San Bernardino, Stockton, and others taught us, if you don't do things promptly, you'll suffer a bad fate, but you can avoid it.
Mr. Bob, I was going to actually get you in on this question. Another big issue here in Illinois, considering the Supreme Court decision regarding pension reform here in Illinois, and you kind of referenced this in talking about Detroit and the constitutional protection that was provided there for pensioners. House Bill 298, how might that run into constitutional questions, in your opinion, given what the Supreme Court ruled?
I mean, so as Carol mentioned, there's sort of now, after coming out of the Detroit bankruptcy, one of the precedents was that they did use, the federal bankruptcy. I mean, one of the rulings of the judge there was the federal bankruptcy law trumps the constitutional protections. But I mean, I think there's a real issue here, which is that Chapter 9 does require states to authorize bankruptcy. If the Illinois Constitution says that you may not impair pensions, then, and this was one of the questions that was raised in Detroit as well, it's that, well, then is it actually constitutional for the city to allow, I mean, for the state to allow cities to file bankruptcy if that will subject them to a process that will impair pensions? And in the case of Detroit, what was interesting was there's actually a state judge that was getting ready to rule that it was not constitutional. The emergency manager asked for a 5-minute recess. During that 5-minute recess, filed bankruptcy to preempt that, to preempt the being called off, right? So,
well, the U.S. Supreme Court in the city of Asbury Park many years ago, back in the 30s, 40s, basically ruled that you don't have an impairment if in reality you don't have funds to pay it. It's just a recognition of reality. And I think that's something, if the municipality doesn't have the money, will never have the money, arguing about not impairing it doesn't seem to be a good argument.
And I think there's a fundamental fairness question that proponents or the folks against bankruptcy keep raising, which is fairness to the employees. That's definitely an issue, and I don't want to diminish it. However, from my standpoint, we have to look at the fairness for all of our citizens. And the frustration I have is that the majority of my public safety, most expensive pensions that I deal with are folks that don't even live in the city of Rockford anymore. So it's somewhat hypocritical to be chastising the very system that is employing you to be able to live somewhere else where you don't have to pay our taxes. So our challenge, I think, is collectively, if we can come to the table, to be able to develop a mechanism that is fair to all of the interested parties. Not easy to do.
I mean, I actually completely agree with you on that. I think it is about being fair to all taxpayers. But I think the thing there is that, again, it goes back to this question of, instead of talking about what should we cut, taxpayers or our pensions, because to me, properly funded services means properly funding the people who will be providing the services. So properly funded services, includes both, providing the services and paying for it, and paying for the people who will actually be providing them. To me, the bigger question does go back to this issue that both, Jim, you raised the Chicago's 6th biggest GDP. Mayor Morrissey, you talked about all the, how resource-rich Illinois and Chicago both are. The fact is that we are one of the richest cities, one of the richest states in the country, one of the richest cities in the world. And so the idea that we can't afford the services that we all actually need to fully pay for those is actually it's a joke. The fact is that we're not properly taxing the big corporations. We need a millionaire's tax. We actually need to figure, I mean, we have these huge financial exchanges on LaSalle Street, right? I mean, financial transactions tax could bring in $10 to $12 billion in revenue every year.
So this is the golden goose that Chicago has that Rockford doesn't have, and there's like 2 places in the whole country, New York and Chicago, that have the financial marketplaces that this area has. So kill the golden goose, and then you're in our neck of the woods. That'll be fun, right? So then you get to feel my pain when you don't have the financial services groups to tax because they've already threatened it, and you think they won't take advantage of it? Hey, I am no friend of big financial institutions. They have screwed Rockford. Everybody can talk to a personal tragedy that they've suffered or their families have suffered having to deal with Wall Street. That's a different conversation. But the reality we're dealing with is that who gets to retire at age 50, drawing 70% of their highest wage, right, with 3% annual promise compounding interest? Police and firefighters in Rockford, Illinois. Even Chicago's less expensive. Chicago, it's age 55. They don't have automatic compounding interest. And what I'm telling you is it's one thing to have done it, but when you make a mistake and you no longer can afford it, then we can't live in a system where it's simply not allowed to reset. It's not fair to everybody else who has to pay the bill.
I mean, I have to say, I don't know. I mean, I actually think that instead of scapegoating police and firefighters, I mean, there's a reason why they retire at 50, right? Because the fact is,
you don't want them out there protecting you.
And they don't pull Social Security.
I want to jump in here. I'm sorry. I just want to jump in quickly. We want to get to Q&A from the audience, and I don't want us to run out of time.
You can get there, but I'm going to answer this question first. So here's the deal. They can retire whenever they want. Nobody's putting a gun to their head. Talk to a union construction worker that's done roofing their whole life. They don't get the same deal, right? If their knees go out, they have to retire and get a new job. They don't get the same deal. There's hardworking people everywhere. They keep playing that card as though they're the only ones who work hard. God bless them. They do work very hard. They have very difficult positions. But generally what happens, and I've seen it time and time again in our own shop, when you're older, you're not doing the same work that a young 20-something patrol officer is doing.
Couple quick questions before we get to Q&A. I'm sorry, I just want to dive in.
That's good.
Governor Rauner implied that Chicago Public Schools should consider bankruptcy, and I just want to talk just from the standpoint of CPS, school districts in general. Very few, Mr. Spiato, from the data that you've put out there. I want to say you counted 6 since 1980. Is there kind of a special area that we should think about with regard to school districts who, even the Chicago Public School District, doesn't have the kind of latitude that the city of Chicago has in terms of generating revenue? Should we be thinking about school districts in some way differently, given those kinds of restrictions?
Well, generally and historically, states and as a policy matter have viewed schools so important to the state and the local governments that the last thing they want to do is see a bankruptcy of it. The reason why there have only been 6, and 2 of them weren't school districts, they were a building authority and a college. So of the others, 2 of them were in California, both of them were dismissed. They found another way of solving it. One was a small district in Alaska, the other was a small district in Missouri. Every successful dealing, whether it's the LA schools and the Philadelphia schools, I mean, there have been all sorts of examples throughout the country of trying to deal with the problem. They have been done with some oversight, dealing with education, curriculum, operation, and financing, and addressing it in a way that helps the school reinvest in itself, because it's important to the government to have the best educated workforce you can.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think in terms of bankruptcy for school districts, what's really problematic about that is, I mean, Jim, you mentioned earlier that in bankruptcy, it's sort of the creditor's best interest that comes first, right? The fact is that, I mean, one, I would say this applies to all levels of government, but certainly in a school, you don't want the creditor's interest coming first. You actually want the children's interest coming first. And so it really is really problematic to be saying we should just be going to bankruptcy and letting a bankruptcy judge decide, you know, how we're paying this, how we're doing this. But the more important thing with CPS in particular, right, is if you look at CPS's sort of big shortfall, it actually, their pension shortfall, it's actually entirely based on the fact that in the last 3 years, just the last 3 years, Mayor Emanuel skipped all the pension payments. Before that, they were actually doing quite well. And those are the same 3 years in which they closed record schools and they did various other things, right? And so the fact is that even sort of skipping the payments for those years didn't actually stop the painful cuts. So that's what we're sort of saying. What we really need is figure out how we can actually bring more revenue into the system, because there actually is, I mean, one, the other thing is if you want to actually hire quality teachers and retain quality teachers, you need to be able to keep your promise to them as well, right? It's not just police and firefighters. The fact is that if you want good teachers, you actually need to properly compensate them. The fact is that we need to properly fund schools, and the solution isn't just to say that we're going to, declare bankruptcy and now we can undo the teachers' pensions. It really should be that how can we actually properly fund education?
Okay, one final question before we turn to audience questions. And I just want to mention for the folks who are following us on Twitter, if you've got a question, get it in quickly. You can, it's at BetterGov, send it to @BetterGov, hashtag Muni Bankruptcy. So that final question, very quickly, we can start with you, Mayor Morrissey, and just go down the list here. Should the state pass House Bill 298? Very quick, simply.
Yes, absolutely. The state should pass the bill. It empowers communities to solve the problems and create solutions that they need for their citizens.
Ms. Neville?
I'd like to see a bill, but not one that necessarily gives bondholders a lien and a heads up over others. But I'd like to see a bill that that does contain some hoops that a municipality has to jump through before it can really consider bankruptcy.
Mr. Body?
That's absolutely not. We do not need to be talking about bankruptcy. We should be talking about how we actually bring in progressive revenue so we can properly fund services. Right now, we seem to be talking about bankruptcy as a way to, in effect, it's a politically expedient way to not make tough decisions and say, well, a bankruptcy judge is tying our hands. And instead, we need to actually, instead of using it as a panacea, we need to actually do the difficult thing and raise progressive revenue in the state.
And Mr. Spiatto?
Well, as we've said, I think the history has taught us we should find solutions before we ever need to get to that thought. Whether we need that ability to think about it in order to find the solution, I'll leave that to others to decide.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so now for all those burning questions that we have in the audience, I'm sure there are some. We have Mr. Reed here.
Please raise your hand and identify yourself, and please don't take the microphone. That's all I ask.
Yeah, Sheila Weinberg, Truth in Accounting. You mentioned that we all need to work together. I assume the constituents are the taxpayers, the lenders, and the workers. Now, the workers, under the new Supreme Court ruling, there's no reason for them to work together. They're going to get their guaranteed benefits. The taxpayers, no reason for me to work together. I can just leave. And the lenders, I get paid first, so there's no reason for us to work together. So what other option is there besides bankruptcy?
Well, Sheila, it's a good question, but I think we can all agree. One, from the workers' standpoint, if we all don't work together, where's the future for the workers? Do you need that many? Will you have the revenues to pay for the revenue, to pay for the workers of a retiree? For the taxpayers, yes, you can leave, but, we all prefer to be where we are. And I think working together and possibly sharing some pain is the way to find a solution. And vis-a-vis the creditors, I think that, quite candidly, everybody in a financial market is looking for the future. The future of getting paid is more bright if you're reinvesting and growing the community as opposed to fighting over it.
But those categories are very overbroad. What I really saw in Detroit was when you talk about the workers, we had the unions, we had the retirees, we had retiree associations, we had active police and firefighters, and they were all on our committee. So we had representatives from all of those groups. You have to break it down to really have a conversation. When you lump workers together, it's kind of a meaningless thing, and you can't really talk about solutions.
Carol seemed to think that the 14 months or whatever the Detroit bankruptcy took was a long time. What we're going through now has been a lot longer, right? So it's like I'm a Cubs fan, So maybe this year, So I would encourage you to run for the General Assembly, Senate, House, you pick, because we need someone and we need folks who have that level of sobriety when you come to the conversation. The reality is, if Springfield could have done it, they would have done it already to solve these problems. the reality is bankruptcy provides not the ultimate solution. It's not a great solution, but it forces folks to come to the table in a way. I've been wishing it to be different, like I've wished since I was a child the Cubs would win a World Series. Hasn't yet happened. I'm not going to hold out for it when I think a bankruptcy judge can do for all of the stakeholders what Springfield has shown they're unable or unwilling to do.
We have another question here.
Hi. Okay, Stan Hollenbeck of Hollenbeck Strategies. Mr. Spiato touched on this briefly. 40 years ago, New York was in exactly the same situation we were in, for exactly the same reasons that we have today. And yet they were able to avoid bankruptcy through MAC. Would you care to comment on that as a solution to Chicago's problems?
Yes, I mean, I think MAC is a good example. It was a good example for Cleveland. It was a good example for Philadelphia. I think it helped with Pittsburgh also. And what it is you provide some technical advice in a supervising body if it's needed. If you have the wherewithal within the municipality, you can. New York City did not. They needed MAC to help give them the discipline and the experience and expertise to bring it about. Some municipalities have it internally and they don't need it. But the other thing it did is it got people to address a problem that had been developing. They lost 500,000 jobs since 1969 to 1975. They were losing over $1 billion in assessed value every year. And those losses created the problem. I don't think Chicago is anywhere near that, but at the same time, we know from everything we've seen historically that doing it early as possible, addressing it, and it's really a question of liquidity. And what we're really addressing is to do some things now that help improve reinvesting in the city so that long term will increase jobs, employment, and revenues so that we'll have the money to pay. Pensions and employees are long-term obligations. They're in it for the long run anyways. So it's only good for them. The investors get paid in the long run, and the citizens want the services in the long run.
And you know, the end of the Detroit bankruptcy actually put in place a financial oversight commission that is theoretically supposed to continue to do the same thing that MAC did in New York. So I agree that it is a solution.
All right, we have a question here. I'll come by.
Jean Lotus. I'm just wondering, other states do not seem to have very localized police and fire pension committees, and why is it that the teachers and the IMRF have statewide pension groups? And it seems like there's a lot of redundancy and a lot of maybe unsophisticated investors, and in a very local 5-person pension committee for every single little municipality in Illinois.
Yeah, welcome to Illinois. So I'm happy to take the first stab at that. Yeah, I don't know the history of how that occurred. I'm part of the IMRF. IMRF is not in the same position. We fund IMRF. IMRF is a lot more affordable. Although there's a lot of members in IMRF, it's still a significant payment that we make every year into it. I would be supportive of a system that allowed communities to be part of a larger pool that allows more sophisticated and varied and diversified investment opportunities to hopefully get a better return. That's been part of the discussion. It's not a panacea. It's certainly open to that being part of the discussion, however.
Right. We have a question here, and then we'll take one more, and that'll be it.
Hi, I'm Mike Lotus. Ms. Neville told us that the Detroit bankruptcy, the way the thing was handled, it was almost like a free fall. They had inadequate planning going in. I'm going to ask you to entertain two hypotheticals. One, the law passes and municipalities in Illinois can file for bankruptcy. Two, the city of Chicago does do so. Assuming that were to happen, what would be the features of a Chapter 9 workout plan for the city of Chicago that it should have? What thinking and planning and elements should be included in advance if, God forbid, that were to happen?
Wow. Well, I think one thing is, and Jim said it and so did the mayor, actually we all said it, you got to start now I would start, you have to start organizing the constituents down to the nitty-gritty, from the associations, the unions, the retirees, the actives, on the employee side. On the bondholder side, they tend to organize themselves pretty well. It's not just lenders. You have insurers. You have the direct bondholders. You have the indenture trustees, or they're not indenture trustees in municipal bonds anymore. You have all different groups. You have secured bonds and unsecured bonds. You have to get these groups identified and really talking to each other. Jim keeps saying we need to have a plan and talk about things. I don't have the answer for Illinois right now. I've been digging in Illinois and Chicago for the last month, and I'm just beginning to see what project financing can do, where the taxes are being used. It's not an easy thing, but I think a financial commission, some trustworthy, and God, I can see Dick Ravitch coming in here too, somebody who has experience in setting these things up and working through them, and then setting up the constituent groups and talking. I know it sounds kind of vague, but I'm trying to get it as specific as I can. I see who these groups are because they're already talking. They're just not talking to each other. And once you identify the groups, you have to organize them.
And our last question.
Hi, I'm Jerry Nudo. I work at a realty company in Chicago. Jim has talked about one of the best ways to solve the problem is to increase revenue. If you're proposing to increase my income taxes by more than 100% and my real estate taxes by at least 50%, how do you attract people to come and stay in Chicago? I know many people right now that are leaving for Texas, Florida, Nevada, and these are the people that can pay the tax. So if you raise taxes like that, Illinois is barely growing right now compared to these other states. Aren't you just going to bleed out and the problem's just going to get exacerbated and this state will devolve into bankruptcy?
Right. That's exactly the point I was making, that taxes can't go to the sky. And that what you really need to do is reinvest, and by reinvest I mean infrastructure. We have $3.6 trillion worth of infrastructure improvements over the next 5 years just to maintain passable infrastructure in the United States. We have not done that because we wanted to show how frugal we were since 2008. If we did that, we would create more jobs and economic stimulus. We need to attract more industry and business. Numerous states have done studies, and if you were to add 10,000 more jobs to a city, that can give you double or triple the indirect, direct, and introduced jobs. It can increase your revenues, your tax revenues, 100 million to 300 million by increasing the jobs. It can have an economic impact of 1 billion to 2.5 billion to the economy. That's what we need to do, is add more jobs.
There's not a one-size-fits-all for every municipality.
That's right. Well, that's why I like bankruptcy, because it allows for the customization of a solution. By the way, I'm not against revenue, but I don't want to use new revenue to pay for old bills. What James is talking about is an investment strategy that, frankly, we should be doing if we're talking about new development, new opportunities that will generate new revenue. I don't want to use new revenue to pay for a bill that I should have had figured out, or I built a system that was simply not sustainable and we can't afford. That's why I think the solution where a bankruptcy judge can resolve those issues in a way that's most customized and effective for a given community seems today, at least, to be the best way to go.
I want to point one thing out. Creditors have to vote for the plan before the judge actually approves it. And in that vote, and in getting to the place where creditors will approve the plan, are the compromises that you don't actually want to make.
I'm not saying I wouldn't make a compromise, but I don't. Right now, we have no leverage. There is nothing. We're in suspended animation right now. as a city, I'm telling you, there is no one pushing back if it's not a mayor and a city council willing to push back. It has been a very unfriendly position to protect taxpayers. Management has had basically zero presence, so it is a very difficult situation. And right now, without bankruptcy as an option, there simply isn't a lever to press back.
But so this is actually one of the biggest problems with this whole, I think, conversation, right? I mean, I sort of say about Detroit that, like, we sort of said that Detroit cut pensions because it was bankrupt. I actually think it went bankrupt so it could cut pensions. And we're talking about doing the same thing here, and that's the bigger problem. That bankruptcy is actually, it's not a scalpel, it's actually a hammer, right? And it's a really big one. And the fact is, if we're talking about sort of doing that, to slash pensions because as part of a management strategy, bargaining strategy with the unions, that's actually a really big problem and speaks to broader issues. As for the tax thing, I will point out, you know, I used to live in Nevada for a few years. There's no income tax, it's true, but they have the worst schools. I mean, in 06, when the gubernatorial candidate who was running pointed out that we were at the bottom of every bad list, at the top of every bad list, at the bottom of every good list, which is absolutely true. The fact is, California is one of the highest taxed places in the country, and they're growing population-wise, and their economy is growing and everything else because they actually provide, people get the bang for the buck for that. Sorry, right. But they are actually still sort of prospering and doing well, and they actually just in 2012 introduced a high earners tax because once you actually have proper revenue, that you can do the kind of investment that you need, that Jim was talking about, to actually be able to grow the economy.
There's 2 points to make. First, there's a difference between willingness to pay and inability to pay. What the mayor is talking about is the inability to pay. We can't create money that won't be there. We can't promise to pay things we won't have funds to pay. So we need to adjust that in some way that is sustainable and affordable. That's what the mayor's talking about. Because if we don't do it in the right way, exactly what you say will happen. People will leave. The second point is that we need to make sure, and that's why the best, I think, if anybody wants to use Chapter 9, the best way of using it is a prepackaged or pre-negotiated. Get everybody together, get your recovery plan, get people to sign up, and implement it. Because Chapter 9 is like open heart surgery. The longer you stay in, no matter how good the surgeon, you may not live through it.
I think that's a fair...
I just want to clarify one thing. The Detroit pensions were very minimally cut. At the end of the day, they were well enough funded so that they didn't have to be cut. The police and firefighters lost a little bit of their cost of living adjustment, and the municipal employees lost 4% of their pension, and there is a restoration mechanism.
Well, we'll cut the conversation at that point, and in the interest of time, we'll forego the closing arguments. So we'll bring Andy up. I just want to say the Union League Club runs a tight ship, and if we're not done very long after we're supposed to be done, the lights will go out, the ground will start shaking. It's like San Andreas in Chicago. So Andy, please close us out.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Actually, what happens is all the help at the Union Club goes on double time, and the BGA can't afford them, so that's why we have to end on time. Listen, it really is heartwarming to see a room full of people on a subject that is both complicated, controversial, and grim in a lot of ways. It just shows that there's an appetite for healthy discussion of public policy issues in an objective, nonpartisan, apolitical way. And I think this panel gave us a real spectrum of views of the scope of the problem and also potential solutions and pitfalls along the way. I'm afraid we don't come out of here with a roadmap for what to do, but that's because there probably isn't one. And we certainly haven't had the leadership at any level of government to provide that to us, but at least we're beginning the conversation. Meantime, follow us on bettergov.org. We do a lot of radio and television, some very good investigations and policy initiatives. We file lawsuits when we have to. Final word, we're all in this together. If we don't re-engage this community, we're never going to solve any of these problems. We have a massive crisis of civic disengagement in this state and around the country, and we're not going to reclaim our democracy and solve these problems unless more and more citizens get involved. No panel at a table, no individual mayor, no watchdog organization by itself is going to get it done. We need an army of citizens armed with information and good judgment, and then paying attention, registering, and voting for people working for them and not themselves, and then eventually we'll get the better government we deserve. May not be in my lifetime, but hopefully it'll be in some of yours, especially people who are under like 25. Anyway, have a great evening. Go Hawks, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.